Clearly, Thornycroft's invocation of the group of seven, coupled with the use of toys and other props to describe a series of complicated tableaus, indicates a readiness to be allied with the Neo-Baroque and overtly proposes a post-Canadian framework. And despite that the artist's expression operates in an unsettled way regarding history, it's my contention that it adheres to the tenets of the Neo-Baroque most substantially when it offers viewers multiple and often competing historical narratives within the pictorial framework. And we also have one other work by Thornycroft. There's a huge number in this series, but she is used, you know, I think Bobby Hull is going through the ice, and Bobby Orr, thank you. Anyway, these are obviously toys that she's getting on eBay.
The first one is La Fleur.
Yes, and La Fleur is there.
La Fleur, I recognize it.
It's a game in heaven or hell. I'm not sure. Okay, I'll move on to my second theme. In his essay, The Baroque Planet, Serge Brzezinski points to the history of the first transculturations in the second half of the 16th century with the expansion of the Iberian nations worldwide. As a result of that movement, new groups arose everywhere. These new societies, though certainly inegalitarian, mixed the traditions of many continents to forge numerous mestizo cultures. Brzezinski claims that it was due to the movements of artists and traditions that the so-called Baroque planet was born. Zamudio Taylor refers to the effect of colonialism and its aftermath as having produced an amalgamation, in quotes, an amalgamation and layering of ethnicities and a transculturation of spiritual and cultural practices, close quote. In our context, the term transculturation is very familiar, but I remind us that according to Zamudio Taylor, Cuban scholar Fernando Ortiz described it as, in quote, a category that analyzes constitutive moments, destructive as well as constructive, throughout the history of colonialism and post-colonialism. By its very definition and processes, transculturation resists essentialism. Here, for the purposes of my analysis, I want to take up the idea of transculturation with regard to works by Skye Glavish from Hinterlands, and also I'll look at Rebecca Belmore. While the work of Glavish could not be described as overtly demonstrating a critical engagement with post-coloniality, we can view it with regard to a layering of modern and postmodern traits, as well as regarding notions of class within North America. And indeed, the work for me allows us to analyze constitutive moments in relation to the history of aesthetic modernism and its aftermath. Skye Glavish paints image of vernacular modernist houses he photographed in London, Ontario in preparation for producing the three works in the exhibition. In these commanding large-scale oil paintings, the bland and uniform conventions of mid-20th century local architecture, in brackets or in quotes, are displaced by energetic yet sometimes discomforting charges of color. In this one, Wortley House 2007, for example, a flat-roofed two-story house with its dark windows and uniquely decorative brick screen on its front has become like a canvas or a box of paint swatches. And as if somehow embarrassed by its own potential awkward reserve, the house has turned colors to resist the camouflaging effect of middle-class status and arguably to change its culture. The trees and other vegetation surrounding it are similarly chromatically charged, but it's the house that bears the greatest responsibility for the picture's strangeness. Birch from 2007 and Bungalow from 2007, the other two paintings in the exhibition, produce an equally surprising effect through their compelling use of color. Simultaneously made up and true, these are sights the viewer has both seen and not seen, and they present us with a visual experience that ultimately attracts and repels. Here, culture with respect to class and aesthetic histories is made mobile and reflexive. And I'm just going to keep moving. I could say more about this work, but I'm aware of time. First Nations Canadian artist Rebecca Belmore's oeuvre is distinctly invested in post-colonial discourse and uniquely exhibits transcultural aspirations. In this stirring work from the Venice Biennial 2004, maybe 5, I think I may have a mistake on the date, the artist presents a video of herself projected on cascading water. That's not how it's actually shown here, but in the actual installation, the video was projected on a screen of water. Within which she's depicted. She's on a West Coast beach, seen hauling a bucket that appears to be filled with an oily material left over from an environmental disaster. But when she hurls the contents outward at us, at our paradigmatically culpable selves, the material turns to red, to blood. Belmore's work is an indictment of the colonial past, but she also enters knowingly into the histories of modern performance art that engage with issues concerning the body and psychic space. In this and multiple works, Belmore, who is originally from a reserve in northern Ontario and now lives in Vancouver, where she's married to a Cuban artist, by the way, extends herself across cultural histories and divides. And I'll just show you a few other works by Belmore. This is quite an old one, entitled Speaking to Their Mothers, and it was a performance-related work where people were invited to actually speak through this giant kind of decorative megaphone. This is a work that I don't know too much about, but I believe that it's actually, it's like a kind of a pall. It's as if it's a giant kind of funeral kind of casket covering for water and in relation to water. But some of her actual sensibilities, I would say, have a strong minimalist leanings. And this is actually kind of basically a sort of a still that relates to basically a performance and installation work she did at the Art Gallery of Ontario, where she was she had a giant colonial bed that was covered with this quilt that she's covered in, but the quilt actually has black human hair sewn all around it, and she's actually she spent the whole time of the exhibition in the bed. And I don't have an image of that. That's her. Yeah, that's her. So that's really just a kind of publicity still more than anything, I think. Now, I'm not ready to make a distinct claim at this point for the potential to read the works of these two producers as essential Neo-Baroque representations produced from two subject positions, I do want to foreground the question, again, is the transcultured post-Canadian, so-called, an essentially different subject as if he is a former colonizer or an Aboriginal? I'm going to move on to my third question. Serge Grzinski reminds us that mestizo creation encourages not only manipulations of every sort, but appropriation as well. So the promiscuous borrowing and mixing of alike with unlike is a hallmark of the Neo-Baroque. So, what comes to be produced, though often seemingly full of derivations, lacks, as Grzinski says, in quotes, pedigree, author, or apparent history, close quote. Grzinski notes that this offers us another story, a hybrid, no longer preoccupied with the rise of nation-states. Instead, artists present, and this is his quote, accounts less ethnocentric of the interactions among different worlds, close quote. Regarding such hybridity, the term, and I've coined this term, surregionalism, has been coined to point to one of the fascinating qualities the artists in Hinterlands share. They're simultaneously dedicated to presenting the specific zone or region out of which they operate, while also being prone to advancing a strange or even perverse and yet presumably more insightful reading of the place. And now I move on to the work of Fastworms. If my machine will do it. Okay. Such a contradictory approach is nowhere as peaked as in the work of Fastworms, which are this particular one titled Getaway Cars, Safe Houses, Lookouts, and there's another related one called The Organization. In casually mounted collections of snapshots on which labels and asides have been roughly appended with magic marker, the duo sets out to invoke a region within the benign appearance of middle-class calm, and the casualness of life outside the urban maelstrom are simply sinister cover-ups. Speaking about their practice in their biography, Kim Cozy and Di Scoose, who are Fastworms, tell us that Fastworms is the trademark and joint authorship of Toronto, Creemore-based multidisciplinary artists whose artwork melds high and popular cultures, bent identity politics, social exchange, and a witch-positive DIY cinematic sensibility. And they do say that they are actual witches, so this is part of their self-identification. Fastworms' cultural politics are complex and strategically subversive. They're critical aesthetics, relational and inclusive, with a bent towards working class, craft collaborations, and queer alliance. So they basically have a fairly large framework within which they situate themselves.